Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The atmosphere on Draxon 7, a planet located in the farthest reaches of the Zyrian galaxy, was one of royalty and rigid tradition. The ancient citadel of King Thraken was a marvel of sleek, obsidian architecture, and the entire world revered the monarch. He was powerful, wise, and undeniably dominant, not just in his rule but in his marriage to Queen Valera, a woman of unparalleled beauty and intelligence. Together, they commanded their empire, a force feared across multiple galaxies. But behind the regal facade, cracks were beginning to show. Thraken had always been confident in his rule and in his queen. The entire empire trusted her as much as they trusted him. Yet something had changed. He could feel it, a shift in the air. He had sensed her growing distant, her eyes wandering from him during meetings. It wasn't like Valera to shy away from his touch or avoid his gaze. They had shared an unshakable bond since their union, one that no external force could have fractured, until now. When the king's elite spies began reporting strange movements around Valera's private chambers, he dismissed them as baseless gossip. After all, who would dare to challenge the queen, a woman who was as beloved as she was feared? However, one late night, Thraken couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. In the shadows of his grand throne room, he waited for the quiet footsteps of his trusted lieutenant, Kaler, to announce a breakthrough. Kaler was the king's most loyal servant, a silent shadow who had been by Thraken's side through countless battles and victories. With a swift motion, Kaler approached and bowed deeply. "My lord, it's as we feared," Kaler whispered, voice steady but laced with regret. "We've intercepted a communication that confirms the queen's infidelity. She's been meeting with 2 humans, unregistered visitors from the distant Terran colonies. They've been seen in her private quarters. More than once." Thraken's fists clenched, his vision narrowing. A cold chill swept over him. He had always held humans in low regard, seeing them as primitive and weak compared to the vast power of the Zyrian Empire. To think that Valera, his queen, had not only betrayed him with such insignificant beings but had also kept the affair hidden for so long. It felt like a betrayal of everything they had built together. For a moment, the king could hardly breathe. He could picture the queen, the woman he had adored, with those Terrans, those pathetic humans. His chest tightened at the thought. Who were these humans to dare sully the purity of his queen? "Do you have names?" Thraken asked, his voice low but dangerous. Kaler nodded, pulling up a holoscreen and displaying images of the 2 humans. One was a tall, muscular man with fiery red hair, his face stern yet alluring. The other was shorter, with dark brown eyes and an easy smile that could disarm anyone. Their faces were unmistakable, even in the galaxy's vast reaches. They were known to the Zyrian Empire, 2 Terran soldiers who had become infamous for their daring raids on Zyrian outposts years ago. "Eldon and Soren," Kaler said quietly. "They are known rebels. Their actions have cost us countless resources in the past." The king's mind raced. These humans, who had once been a thorn in his side, had somehow captured the heart and body of his queen. The betrayal was personal, but it also threatened the stability of his empire. If word of this affair got out, it could destabilize his reign. The queen's unfaithfulness could incite civil unrest. The ramifications of this betrayal were far-reaching. "I want answers," Thraken commanded, his voice cold and filled with venom. "Prepare the ship. We are going to confront Valera and these humans. The truth must be uncovered, and I will not rest until it is." As he stormed out of the throne room, his heart heavy with anger and disbelief, the king's mind swirled with questions. What had driven his queen to such a drastic act? Was it simply lust, or was there something deeper, a hidden agenda, perhaps? Whatever it was, Thraken had no intention of letting it slide. He would get to the bottom of this, even if it meant shattering everything he had ever known. The journey to Valera's private estate on the far side of Draxon 7 would take hours, but in that time, Thraken's thoughts raged. How had it come to this? How could he not have seen the signs? He had been so certain of their love, so sure of his power, that he had never considered the possibility that Valera might be playing a different game. As the king sat in the silence of his ship, the hum of its engines and the stars streaking by outside, one thing became clear. This was not just about a personal betrayal. It was about the very foundation of his empire, and it would take more than just his strength to survive this storm. Something had shifted in the galaxy, something dangerous, and it had started with two humans who dared to challenge the might of the Zyrian Empire. As they neared their destination, Thraken steeled himself for what was to come. The truth, no matter how painful, was about to be revealed. The ship cut through the thick clouds of Draxon 7, its sleek, dark hull gliding effortlessly toward the isolated estate of Queen Valera. King Thraken stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the estate's towering spires could be seen emerging from the dense forest below. It was an eerie sight, the once beautiful landscape now shrouded in an unsettling silence, as if the very world was holding its breath. His mind continued to race. What had driven Valera to this point? She had always been so composed, so meticulous. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment, it was a calculated decision. The mere thought that two humans could charm his queen so easily gnawed at his pride, and a sharp edge of rage sliced through his thoughts. But he couldn't let that rage cloud his judgment. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Prepare the ground team," Thraken ordered, his voice cold and steely. "And make sure no one interferes." Kaler, who stood silently beside him, nodded in compliance. The king's most trusted lieutenant quickly relayed the orders to the rest of the elite soldiers, who had been carefully selected for this mission. They were the best of the best, loyal, lethal, and unwavering. The king needed them at their peak, for what awaited them was not a simple confrontation, but a test of everything he held dear. As the ship touched down with a soft, controlled thud on the estate's landing platform, the air around them seemed to grow thick with anticipation. The sprawling estate was eerily quiet, with only the faint rustling of the alien trees in the distance breaking the stillness. The massive doors to the queen's quarters remained closed, a silent barrier between Thraken and his answers. Stepping off the ship, Thraken's boots clicked against the cold stone of the landing pad, his presence commanding immediate attention. His soldiers followed in perfect formation, surrounding him as they advanced toward the estate's entrance. Each step was measured, deliberate, as if the very ground itself was questioning whether the king would prevail. Kaler approached the door and pressed a hidden button on the wall, and the massive entryway slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the dim lighting illuminated the luxurious interior of the estate. Velvet tapestries adorned the walls, and the scent of exotic flowers lingered in the air. But none of it mattered. Not now. Thraken's gaze swept the room, looking for any sign of Valera, or the humans she had betrayed him with. "Where is she?" Thraken demanded, his voice commanding as he turned to Kaler. "I want her now." Kaler's expression was unreadable as he stepped forward, his own instincts on high alert. "My lord, we have reason to believe she is in the private chambers. We've detected the human males nearby as well." The tension in the air was palpable as they made their way through the winding corridors of the estate, the walls closing in around them with each step. Thraken's mind was torn between fury and disbelief. His heart pounded in his chest, and the silence around him was maddening. They reached the entrance to Valera's private chambers, a massive set of ornate doors made of polished black stone. Thraken stopped just short of pushing them open, his eyes narrowing as he listened intently. There was movement inside, the sound of muffled voices. One of them was unmistakably Valera's. The other voices were unfamiliar. With a swift motion, Thraken raised his hand, signaling for his soldiers to stand back. He nodded to Kaler, who stepped forward and activated a small device on his wrist. A soft click echoed through the hall, and the doors opened without a sound. The scene before them was nothing short of a nightmare. Queen Valera, dressed in a flowing gown of silver and midnight blue, stood by a table covered with exotic artifacts. The two humans, Eldon and Soren, stood beside her, their expressions one of amusement, as though they were in no danger at all. Their casual demeanor grated against Thraken's senses, their insolence beyond comprehension. For a moment, no one moved. The queen's gaze flicked up to meet Thraken's, her expression unreadable. The air between them crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the chamber's lights. She had known he would come, of course. She had always known him better than anyone. Thraken, Valera said, her voice smooth and composed, as if they were simply discussing the weather. I trust you didn't break any protocol to arrive unannounced? The words cut deep. They were sharp, calculated, and full of an underlying mockery that made Thraken's blood boil. This wasn't the Valera he had known. This was someone else, someone who had betrayed him, and now stood in the presence of the very humans who had desecrated everything he had built. Eldon's lips curled into a half-smile as he looked the king up and down, unimpressed. So, this is the infamous King Thraken, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You certainly live up to your reputation. Shame about your queen, though. We didn't expect her to be so loyal. Soren chuckled softly, clearly enjoying the unfolding drama. Don't worry, your majesty. She's made her choices. Thraken's fury boiled over, but he restrained himself. He had to remain in control. He turned his gaze to Valera, his eyes burning with betrayal. Is this how it is, Valera? You stand with these humans? His voice trembled with barely contained anger. After everything we've built? After all I've given you? Valera's expression softened for a fraction of a second, and for a moment, Thraken thought he saw a flicker of remorse in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a coldness that sent a shiver down his spine. You've given me nothing, Thraken, Valera said, her voice low and measured. You've never truly seen me. You've never truly understood me. These humans, they saw me, they listened to me. Something you never bothered to do. Her words were like a slap across Thraken's face. The king stood motionless, his pride shattered. The woman he had trusted, the one who had stood by his side for so many years, was gone. And in her place was a stranger who had fallen into the arms of two humans. The silence in Valera's private chamber grew heavier, more suffocating with each passing second. The tension between Thraken and the three figures before him, Valera, Eldon, and Soren, was palpable. It was a moment of reckoning, and the weight of it pressed down on Thraken's chest, making it difficult to breathe. Valera's calm demeanor only fueled the fire of Thraken's anger. How could she stand there, so composed, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just shattered everything they had built together? The truth of her betrayal still seemed impossible to fully grasp. But as the seconds dragged on, Thraken realized the truth was simple, though painful. Valera had chosen them. Two humans, two enemies of his empire. Over him, over their shared reign, over everything they had once promised each other. Eldon and Soren exchanged glances, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding before them. They weren't afraid, not in the slightest. Their confidence only served to fuel Thraken's growing resentment. They had come to his world, infiltrated his court, and now stood beside his queen, claiming a place where no Terran had any right to be. Is this what you've become, Valera? Thraken's voice was a low growl, his anger barely contained. He fought to keep his composure. A traitor to your own people? To your king? He spat the word king, as if it had become foreign on his tongue. Valera's gaze softened for a brief moment, but it was fleeting. She took a slow step forward, her voice quiet but steady. You never truly understood me, Thraken. You thought our bond was built on power and politics, but it wasn't. It was built on trust, on love. And somewhere along the way, you lost sight of that. You stopped seeing me. Her words, though calm, cut through Thraken's defenses. Was that how she saw it? Did she truly believe that he had never cared for her? That their shared victories, their long years of unity, had meant nothing? The idea that he had somehow failed her gnawed at him, making the anger burn even hotter. I gave you everything, he hissed, taking a step closer, his voice trembling with the weight of his emotions. And this is how you repay me? By throwing yourself into the arms of humans? Filthy, insignificant creatures who don't even belong in our galaxy. The word stung, But Valera didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. They are more than you give them credit for, Thraken. The humans, Eldon and Soren, they have qualities you could never understand. Compassion, creativity, courage. You think of them as weak, but that's where you're wrong. They're strong in ways you can't measure. Thraken's fists clenched at her words. She spoke as if they were equals, as if her affair with these humans was a mere philosophical debate, a misunderstanding that could be brushed aside with some clever rhetoric. But the reality was far grimmer. Valera had crossed a line, and there would be no going back. Eldon's voice broke the tension, his tone mocking. You've made your point, Thraken. But the truth is, she's made her choice. And we've all moved on. He stepped forward, his gaze locking with the king's. You want to know why? Because she deserves more than a ruler who treats her like property. More than a king who demands loyalty out of fear. Soren chuckled, the sound grating on Thraken's nerves. It's not just about wanting her. We see her. She's more than just a queen. She's a woman, and she deserves freedom. Freedom from your expectations, from your empire, freedom. The word lingered in Thraken's mind, like a poison. Was that what she had wanted all along? Freedom from him? From the responsibility they had both shouldered for so long? Could it be that Valera had grown tired of the weight of her crown, the unyielding power they wielded, and simply sought escape, even in the arms of the very beings she had once dismissed as inconsequential? He turned his gaze to Valera, his voice low, barely a whisper. Is that why, then? Was it the weight of the throne that made you seek their embrace? Or was it simply their novelty? Valera did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the floor, as if searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before, but no less resolute. It's not about them. It's about me, Thraken. I never had the chance to find myself, to decide who I wanted to be outside of us. I'm not just your queen. I'm not just your consort. I'm Valera. The finality of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She had been holding onto something deep within herself, something that had been stifled for far too long. All this time, Thraken had seen her as an extension of his own power, a symbol of their empire, but never as an individual, never as a woman with her own desires and needs. The realization stung harder than the betrayal itself. Eldon, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped closer to Valera, wrapping an arm around her waist. She's right, Thraken. You can't keep her in a gilded cage forever, no matter how beautiful it is. She deserves more. The king's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of Valera, standing beside these humans, her body leaning slightly toward them, her trust in them growing by the second. He had never felt so small, so irrelevant. And the worst part was, he had no one to blame but himself. Kaler, who had remained silent up until now, stepped forward. My lord, perhaps it's time to reconsider. We cannot force the queen to stay. If she's chosen her path, we must let her go. Thraken's gaze snapped toward Kaler, the words igniting a new flame of fury within him. Let her go, he spat. You expect me to simply let her walk away with two humans, and let them mock everything I've built? Kaler met his gaze evenly. You have to, my lord. For the sake of your empire, and for the sake of your honor. For a moment, Thraken's world felt like it was crumbling around him. His empire, his legacy, everything he had fought for. It all seemed so fragile, so uncertain. But the truth was clear. There was no way to undo the damage. Valera had made her choice. And now, Thraken had to decide whether he would destroy everything in a futile attempt to control her, or whether he would let her go and face the unknown future that lay ahead. As the weight of his decision pressed down on him, he stood there, frozen, unsure of what came next. Thraken stood motionless, his eyes flickering from Valera to Eldon and Soren, and then back to his own hands, clenched into tight fists. His mind raced, torn between the fury in his chest and the helplessness that threatened to overwhelm him. Valera's words had cut through him, each one like a sharp blade. She was no longer the queen he had ruled beside. She was a woman who had chosen a different path, one that did not include him. "You're making a mistake," he finally said, his voice low, almost to himself. The words were an echo of his disbelief. He wanted to believe she could be swayed, that she had made some error in judgment that could be undone. But the truth was staring him in the face. Valera had crossed a line, and this time it was too far to come back. Eldon and Soren exchanged a brief glance, their expressions a mix of defiance and curiosity. Neither seemed worried in the least, even with the king standing before them, his rage palpable. It was clear to Thraken that the humans had no intention of backing down, and that made everything worse. They weren't afraid of him. They didn't respect him. The power he wielded, the entire empire he had built, it meant nothing to them. And that only served to fuel the fire of his anger. "You've been deceived, Valera," Thraken said, his voice louder now, filled with a venomous edge. "These humans are nothing but opportunists. They've used you for their own gain, just as they use everyone else. You think they care about you? They don't. They never will. You're just another conquest to them." Valera's expression shifted, the cold mask slipping for a moment to reveal something deeper. Regret, sorrow, but also a deep-seated resolve. She looked at Thraken, her gaze unwavering, and then shook her head slowly. "No, Thraken. You're the one who's been deceived. They don't see me as a prize to be won. They see me as an equal, something you've never truly understood." Her words were like a slap in the face, and Thraken's heart lurched, torn between anger and a deep, gnawing pain. For years, he had believed that their relationship was built on understanding, on a mutual bond that could withstand anything. But now he saw it for what it truly was. His expectations, his needs, had always overshadowed hers. Valera had never been an equal in his eyes. She had been a reflection of his power, a part of his empire. And now that was all crumbling. Eldon stepped forward, his gaze cool and confident. "She's right, Thraken. You never saw her for who she was. You saw her as a tool to maintain your control. You wanted a queen, but you never wanted a partner." His voice was steady, but there was an underlying challenge in it, as if daring Thraken to prove him wrong. Soren, who had been silent until now, smirked slightly, his arms crossed over his chest. "If you think you can just force her back into your world of cold, calculated politics, you're wrong. She deserves more than that. We all do." The king's blood boiled at the words, but he couldn't bring himself to lash out. He wanted to strike them both down, to show them who was truly in control, but something held him back. It wasn't fear, not in the traditional sense, but something deeper. A realization that maybe, just maybe, they were right. The words of his lieutenant, Kaler, echoed in his mind. "For the sake of your empire, and for the sake of your honor, you must let her go." But Thraken wasn't ready. Not yet. He couldn't accept it. Not when the very fabric of his life, of his rule, had been shattered in front of him. He was king of the Zyrian Empire. How could he let a single betrayal destroy everything he had worked for? How could he stand by and watch while humans, of all beings, dared to claim his queen? He turned to Kaler, his voice dripping with authority. "Prepare the soldiers. I'm not leaving here without Valera." Kaler's eyes flicked to Valera and then back to his king. "My lord, perhaps it's time to reconsider. The queen's actions cannot be undone, and your soldiers will only add fuel to the fire. This is a matter of the heart, not the empire. This is a matter of the empire." Thraken snapped, his voice rising. He was done with indecision. "The stability of my reign is at risk. The galaxy is watching. If I allow this to happen, it will set a dangerous precedent." Kaler bowed his head, knowing full well the weight of his king's decision. But still, he didn't argue further. The tension between them was thick, but Kaler did not push the issue. There was something deeper at play here, something beyond politics. Valera's voice cut through the heated silence, calm and composed. "You don't have to do this, Thraken," she said, her eyes softening, though her stance remained firm. "You've made your decision, and I've made mine. We cannot go back to what we were. Insignificant now." He had been so consumed by his desire for control that he had lost sight of the one thing that truly mattered, the woman who had once stood beside him as an equal. Valera was gone. And in letting her go, Thraken had finally understood the true cost of his empire. The weight of the decision continued to press down on Thraken long after Valera had left the chamber, her departure marked by the quiet click of the door as it shut behind her. His heart felt heavy, a feeling he had never known in all his years of conquering and ruling. The king, once proud and unshakable, now stood alone. His empire, his legacy, his queen, all slipping through his fingers like sand. His mind kept replaying her words. "I need to live for me." The words echoed in his head, haunting him, reminding him of the years he had spent blind to the truth. The realization that Valera had never truly been free beneath his rule weighed heavily on him. He had thought his love for her was enough. He had assumed that his ambition, his drive to build a powerful empire, was a shared goal. But he had never understood that she wasn't just a queen. She was an individual, with dreams and desires of her own, separate from the throne he had once thought they both ruled. The room felt colder now. The grand chamber, adorned with rich fabrics and golden ornaments, seemed empty, devoid of the warmth it once held when she had been there beside him. The silence was deafening, and Thraken couldn't escape the feeling that his empire had crumbled in that one moment, in that one decision. His rule no longer seemed as important, no longer as satisfying. There was no joy in power without Valera by his side. He had never allowed himself to understand her needs, and now he was left to face the consequences. He turned toward Kaler, who had remained silent during the confrontation, watching from a distance with a solemn expression. "What now?" Thraken's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, as if the act of speaking would somehow make the situation real. "What happens now?" Kaler hesitated, his face a mixture of empathy and resignation. "You have two paths before you, my lord," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "You can rebuild, reclaim your strength, and rule with an even tighter grip. Or you can choose to let go, acknowledge the changes that have already begun, and try to find a different way to lead." Thraken's jaw tightened at the thought of losing his grip on his empire. He had spent his life building it, crushing any obstacle in his path to ensure its growth. But now, it seemed like everything was slipping away. The humans had taken his queen, and with her, a piece of his soul. "Let go," Thraken repeated bitterly. "You speak as though it's so simple. You know nothing of what I've sacrificed to build this." "I know," Kaler said, his voice soft. "But sometimes, my lord, the greatest sacrifice is to let go of the things that no longer serve you. Valera has made her choice, and you must come to terms with it. The future of your empire doesn't depend on her. It depends on you." Thraken clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He could feel the familiar stirrings of rage, the desire to lash out, to make someone pay for this betrayal. But deep down, he knew Kaler was right. His anger wouldn't change the past. Valera was gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. His refusal to truly see her, to acknowledge her as a person with her own desires, had led to this. And yet, part of him wasn't ready to let go. Part of him still clung to the idea of reclaiming her, of forcing her to return. He had the power to do it, didn't he? He could send his armies, he could strike down anyone who stood in his way. But something inside him, something quiet and unspoken, resisted that idea. The thought of losing her forever was more terrifying than any battle he had ever fought. "I can't do this alone," Thraken muttered, pacing the length of the room. "I can't just let her go, not like this. I need her." Kaler's gaze softened, though his words were firm. "You have always relied on your power, Thraken. But perhaps it's time to learn a different kind of strength. One that doesn't come from control, but from acceptance. Valera's choice doesn't make her weak, and it doesn't make you weaker. It simply means you have to evolve just as she has." Thraken stopped in his tracks, his mind racing. He thought of all the battles he had fought, of the empires he had destroyed and the lives he had crushed beneath his heel to build his own. All of it had been for control. All of it had been to prove that he was the master of his destiny. And yet, here he stood, powerless against the one thing he could never control. the heart of the woman he loved. Valera had chosen her own path, and in doing so, she had forced him to confront a truth he had been unwilling to see. The price of domination was the loss of everything that truly mattered. Kaler's words continued to echo in his mind. Acceptance. He didn't fully understand what that meant. Not yet. But he knew that he couldn't keep fighting the inevitable. Valera was gone, and no matter how hard he tried to hold on to her, it would never bring her back. She had chosen her freedom, and if he truly cared about her, he would have to let her keep it. The realization was painful, like a wound slowly closing, leaving behind only scars. Thraken took a deep breath, the tension in his shoulders beginning to ease, if only slightly. For the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his loss without the need to fight it. "I will not chase her," Thraken finally said, his voice quiet but resolute. "She is free. I cannot force her to return to a life she no longer wants. But I will honor her choice, and I will learn to rebuild, to rule in a way that does not demand submission." Kaler nodded, his expression approving. "That is a wise decision, my lord. It may not be easy, but it will be the right one. And in time, you may find that this loss leads to a new kind of strength, one you never knew you had." The king stood silently, staring at the grand window that overlooked the vast, endless horizon of the galaxy. His empire, once a symbol of his unchallenged power, now felt distant and hollow. Yet, in the midst of that emptiness, Thraken realized something. He had lost Valera, but in letting her go, he had gained something far more valuable: the freedom to redefine his own destiny. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Thraken felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could become the ruler he had always hoped to be, not by controlling others but by learning to accept the world as it was. The future was wide open before him, and while the journey would be long and difficult, Thraken knew he would face it with a newfound understanding of what it meant to truly lead. The days that followed Valera's departure felt like a slow, grinding passage of time. Thraken moved through his empire as though in a daze, no longer the unyielding conqueror, but a man stripped of his armor, wandering through the ruins of his own making. His advisors had noticed the change in him. His once powerful, commanding presence had softened, and the decisions he made seemed weighed down by an invisible burden. The empire still thrived, but the king himself had become a shadow of the ruler he once was. Kaler had remained by his side, offering counsel and support, though he said little about the matter of Valera. The truth was, Thraken knew that nothing could replace her. His heart, once full of pride and ambition, now felt an emptiness that no amount of power could fill. And for the first time, he found himself questioning everything he had built. It was in the midst of one of these contemplative moments that an unexpected visitor arrived at the royal palace. Thraken had been walking through the corridors of his grand citadel, a place that had once filled him with pride, now only serving as a reminder of his loss. His footsteps echoed off the marble floors, the sound eerily hollow, as if the walls themselves mourned the absence of the queen. He stopped before the great hall doors, his hand resting lightly on the gilded handle. The air around him was thick with anticipation. He knew something had shifted, but what, exactly, he couldn't tell. A presence was near, one that made his heart race in a way he hadn't felt in years. As the door swung open, he was met with a sight that took his breath away. Valera stood there. Her appearance was different. She had shed the regal garb of her queenly role, instead dressed in simpler, more practical attire, clothing that spoke of freedom and independence. Her long dark hair was loosely tied, and the sparkle that had once been a distant reflection of her role as queen now shone brightly with a new sense of purpose, one that no longer belonged to him. For a moment, Thraken couldn't find his voice. She looked just as beautiful as ever, but there was something else in her eyes now, something he hadn't seen before: peace. She had found it, and it was a peace he could never offer her while they were bound by the confines of his empire. "You're here," he said at last, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Valera gave a small, sad smile. "I had to come back. Not for you, Thraken, but for myself. Needed to see you." to understand if what we had was really over, or if I was just running from something I was not ready to let go of. She stepped into the room, her gaze not wavering from him. There was no anger in her eyes, no accusation, just an open honesty that struck him deeply. She was no longer the queen he had once ruled beside. She was someone entirely new, someone who had learned to live for herself. He swallowed hard, the words coming slow, unsure. I never understood you, Valera. I thought I could make you happy by giving you everything I thought you needed. I never realized that I had been building my empire on your sacrifice, on your obedience, while all you needed was the freedom to make your own choices. Her expression softened, and she nodded. That's the thing, Thraken. I never wanted a life of luxury, of servitude to your throne. I wanted something real, something that was mine. I wanted to find my own strength, not hide behind your power. Silence stretched between them as Thraken processed her words. The weight of his past actions, of all the times he had demanded her loyalty without ever truly understanding her needs, crashed down on him. He had taken her for granted, believing she was a reflection of his own grandeur, when all along she had been a separate soul, seeking her own path. Did you ever love me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Valera's eyes filled with emotion, but her response was calm. I did. I loved you as much as I could, as much as you allowed me to. But love cannot grow in a cage. Love cannot thrive where there is no room to breathe. The truth of her words pierced him like a spear. He had loved her, yes, but only in the way he had wanted to love her. He had not seen her for who she truly was. He had never allowed her the space to grow beyond the role he had cast her in. I can't change the past, Valera, Thraken said, his voice thick with regret. But I can change the future. I can learn to be a better ruler, one who doesn't demand loyalty at the expense of freedom. I can learn to lead with wisdom, not with force. She looked at him for a long moment, studying him as though weighing his sincerity. You've already started to change, Thraken. That's why I'm here. But I can't be the one to walk this path with you anymore. I've chosen my own way, and I can't go back to the life we had, no matter how much I may still care for you. Her words were final, but there was no bitterness in them. It was clear to Thraken that this was a decision she had come to after much thought, much soul-searching. And though it broke his heart to hear it, he knew she was right. The time for them was over. He nodded slowly, though his throat tightened with emotion. I understand, and I respect your choice. I hope, one day, you'll find the peace you've been searching for. Valera gave him one last smile, a bittersweet one. I have, and I hope you will, too. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the echoing silence of the grand hall. Thraken stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the spot where she had been. In that moment, he realized that the greatest gift he could give her was the freedom to live her life as she saw fit. The greatest act of love, perhaps, was to let her go, to step aside and allow her to chase her own happiness. As the doors closed behind her, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace he had once sought through conquest, but the kind that came with letting go. He wasn't the same man who had sought to control everything. He was someone new, someone who understood that true power lay not in domination, but in understanding. And for the first time in years, Thraken felt a glimmer of hope. Not for his empire, not for the crown, but for the future, his future. One where he could lead not through fear, but through compassion. One where freedom could be just as powerful as any throne. The galaxy stretched before him, vast and uncertain. But now it was a place where he might finally find his own peace. And in that quiet moment, Thraken made a promise to himself. He would no longer define his life by what he had lost, but by what he could still become. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.